Hello and welcome to the ILO Global Business and Disability Network webinar. Sorry, Leave No One Offline, Engaging Companies on Digital Accessibility. My name is Yves Veuillet. I am Global Diversibility Leader with the IBM Corporation, and I have the honor and pleasure of moderating today's session. So before I introduce our brilliant guest speakers of today, I will briefly share with you some housekeeping messages, and for accessibility reasons, I will briefly describe myself. So I am a white man based in Belgium. My mother tongue is French, so I'm sorry for my accent. And believe it or not, I'm in my 50s. I know that it's hard to believe, but this is an unfortunate reality. So now about housekeeping. Live captions are provided and can be activated by clicking the CC button. International Sign Interpreter will be visible throughout the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared for those unable to attend. All camera features for participants as well as their microphones are switched off. The chat function for participants is deactivated. All questions to the panelists can be submitted via the Q&A box during the webinar. I am now pleased to introduce our speakers, and I will start with ladies first. I will start with Frances West. Frances is an internationally recognized thought leader, speaker, advisor, and technology executive known globally for her work in digital inclusion and organizational transformation. She is an innovator for inclusion on a global scale, working with organizations to operationalize digital inclusion as a business and technology imperative, and ensuring that diversity is at the core of disruptive innovation. Frances is a trailblazing ASEAN American woman in tech pioneer. Her human-first thinking is rooted in her experience as a first-generation immigrant from Asia who rose to the C-suite at IBM. She is the author of Authentic Inclusion Drives Disruptive Innovation and founder of FrancesWestCo, a global technology strategy advisory company. Our second guest speaker of today is Steve Framel. I hope I pronounce your name correctly, Steve. He is the founder and associate director of the Enterprise Digital Governance Office at Merck, Sharp, and Dole. The Enterprise Digital Governance is a cross-organizational framework that enhances the connection between the global support functions and the business to ensure compliance and optimization in the digital landscape, including digital accessibility. As the enterprise lead for digital accessibility, Steve is the author of the corporate policy as well as a signatory of the standards and procedures, and continues to mobilize a global workforce to provide equal access in the digital environment. In addition and in parallel, cellist and conductor Dr. Stephen Framel continues his 25-plus year career as a professor of music, currently at Eastern University, Pennsylvania in the USA. He is founder and music director of Camerata Philadelphia in the USA and the Port City Music Festival in North Carolina, in Wilmington. And a recording artist, Centaur and Innova Records, and continues to perform the world over to critical acclaim. I will now give the floor to Frances, who will take us through her presentation. Frances, the floor is yours. Francis, can you hear us?
I'm sorry. Hi, this is Frances West. My name, I am an Asian woman with black hair and wearing a yellow sweater. And I want to bid my greetings to all of you who attend today's seminar. I'm extremely excited to share with you the background of the primer Leave No One Offline that we collaborated with ILO under the leadership of Stefan Trommel of the GBDN initiative. And what I want to do is to, like I said, give you the background and also some takeaway that from this primer. It's about a year ago exactly this time during the height of a pandemic when we saw the onset of how technology is being used. Can you go to the next chart? As a foundational of keeping everybody connected, and that to see the impact of technology on future of work. At the same time, we also saw the George Floyd movement, the social justice movement. And at that point already, we see the kind of emergence of inclusion as a major societal force and also in the business arena as a critical initiative. But when we start looking at digital accessibility, which is combining the technology to serve people who are aging with disabilities, we did not see the same kind of focus. And that's when we said that, we really need to do something to make sure that digital accessibility does not get left out as the convergence of the technology and the social justice movement coming together. We all know that the technology actually underpins everything at the workplace, from, for example, a prospect candidate looking at your website or your mobile apps to get a sense of your company, all the way to recruiting AI-based solutions, all the way to your workplace technology, such as your collaboration tools, or your corporate learning through video with captioning. Every step of the way, everything you do in the workplace involves technology. And if we truly want the workplace to be inclusive, we have to think about everybody. So what we decided to do that we want to turn this primer out during this period. Please go to the next chart, and create a primer that is high level enough for business to digest. So what we did was that we took some of the questionnaires that we used for the strategy framework in FrancesWestCo, which encompass the 6 areas. Start with embrace, which is assessing a company's senior management from the board to CEOs embracing of the concept of digital accessibility or digital inclusion, to envisioning, understanding whether the company has a vision, and then to enact to see whether they have governance or policies enacted to support that, all the way to enlist resources such as talent or financial resources like budgets to execute on the digital inclusion, and then to enable, are there critical training and also education in place for the organization, but not the last but not the least is making sure that there are actually metrics in place as an organization to measure the progression of digital inclusion. And we usually use the strategy and then try to assess against different parts of the organization. On the right-hand side, you can see the operational framework that we usually use from assessing the, for example, board members' commitment to these 6 areas, to the CEOs, to the, for example, the corporate functions, which could include HR, legal, and procurement, and so on and so forth. So the message here is that digital inclusion, if we are authentic about it, has to be an organization-wide initiative that involves every aspect of the organization. So what we did was we took the questionnaires we normally use against the strategy framework and also the operational framework, and kind of a test drive it against 5 companies. Please, the next chart, to see, to take a kind of a baseline assessment as to where these companies are, relative to the journey of digital inclusion. And we're very thankful to the company that participated in that. Later on, you're going to hear from Steve Framel from Merck. They were one of the participants, giving us a kind of point in time assessment where their journey is. The good news is that we do see the digital inclusion or accessibility beginning to get focus, but certainly not the level of focus that we would like to, see, in the sense of comparing to, for example, other constituencies such as women or Blacks and so on. So there's still a lot of work needs to be done, especially at this very senior level. The foundational understanding of how digital inclusion needs to be part of the digital transformation information is not quite there yet. We also seen that, like I said, increased focus among other parts of the organization beyond HR, which again is very good news. And the whole concept of a human-centered design thinking is beginning to take hold. So these are all very positive movements that we see. But foundationally speaking, we collectively still have work to do in this area to make sure that digital inclusion is not just seated, for example, with just the responsibility with HR, but it really cut across every aspect of the organization as a holistic approach, because only when you put digital inclusion and accessibility at the center of a business imperatives will you be able to generate the outcome, which is a total inclusion of all people in the workplace, and that you have a place and a means to really retain your talent, and then also, or to compete and retain your talent, and also to expand your marketplace, and plus create the market differentiation. So that really was the genesis and also the intent of this primer that we created, is to help elevate the discussion of the digital inclusion from a more compliance-based, remediation and testing of your website and mobile, all the way up to a strategic imperatives. So with that, I think I'm going to stop the overview and turn the floor back to Eve.
Thank you very much, Frances. I really like the way you position digital accessibility, like not something that is only a nice to have or compliance thing, but really a strategic imperative. I may have a couple of questions for you, Frances. My first question would be around the primer itself. Who is your target audience? Because you mentioned different stakeholders. So my question is really, who is the primer for, and how do you think that? How do you see it being used?
Yeah, when we start talking and thinking about the primer in discussing with the GBDM leadership team, we wanted to make sure that the primer actually come out as almost as a conversation guide that the members of the GBDN can take to their organization. And we know that a lot of the GBDN members are from the HR departments, and which is what this whole discussion usually starts from. But when it comes to digital inclusion or technology or digital transformation, it has to be, like I mentioned, cross-organization. In this case, actually, many cases, in many incidents, has to involve the CEO, the C-suites. So the guide is written in such a way that we use a lot of references and quoting of, for example, surveys. And these surveys we quoted are what I call mainstream business surveys, for example, by McKinsey, by Gartner's. These are analyst companies or management consulting companies that our C-suites are very familiar with, because we all know that anytime any major Fortune 500 company CEO wants to get some a kind of a future, again, here we're talking about future work advice, a lot of time they turn to the big six consulting firms such as McKinsey, Pricewaterhouse, Deloitte. So we try to use a lot of references that these companies publish in the area of digital inclusion, and including, for example, Harvard Business School, right? So the intent is that we do a high-level assessment, point out very succinctly of some of the gaps, and then that will allow our GBDM members to use this primer to engage the conversation with other C-suite or senior VPs in or their organization. We also try to touch upon different areas, not just on the compliance of a digital accessibility assessment and testing, even though that is very important. And frankly, the good news is we've seen a very healthy growth in that area. We see more service provider coming in. We also see companies building up their own skill sets in the testing and remediation area. But we also need to engage, for example, the marketing department to making sure, when they run an event like this, this is a perfect example of how accessible. We have interpreters, we have a captioning. So these are little things, but things that really matters to be embedded into an organization's communication and marketing department. And we also made a kind of a high-level reference to product development. We speak to the design thinking methodology. So we try to go around the whole company 360 degree and give enough just kind of starting point of a point of view, so to speak, so our members can carry that forward. Because obviously each company has a different point of this journey, and also they're coming in with different focus. If you're a retail company, for example, your focus probably is a lot more on the customer engagement or employee engagement side. Whereas if you are a back-end, technology office, you may be thinking more about a product development. So we want to be able to make sure that digital accessibility discussion can start anywhere, everywhere in an organization. Now, of course, it's called a primer, so we don't have the time, and the intent is not to go deep, but the intent is to go wide so we can engage the conversation.
Having read the primer myself, I think you reached the goal, Frances. Thank you very much. That was really very inspirational. I'm now going to give the floor to Steve, and I'm sure that Steve will not contradict anything you said. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yves. Oh, Steve Framel. I have black hair, or it used to be at least, and I'm of mixed heritage, Asian Pacific Islander and white Caucasian, and I'm wearing a blue blazer and a black shirt, and I'm sitting in my home office outside of Philadelphia, and in my environment, I have a world map and some diplomas and artwork by my children. So it's a pleasure to join you today. And I believe is there a slide that's going to be shown? We can show a slide. Good, great. So as was mentioned, I am with Merck and Company, as it's known in the United States, and Merck Sharp and Dome, or MSD, outside of the United States. And very delighted to talk to you about the journey, as Frances mentioned, the journey of digital accessibility. And what you see there on the slide really kind of encapsulates what has been so far a 17-year journey. And I think when you have something as critical and as important as providing equal access to the digital landscape. I think it's very important to have that that foundation within a company, and it may not happen all at once. And as we move through time, you know, the rising tide happens, and you know, you start to be able to build on the foundation. And so in the early years, those foundational elements that kind of were part of the company's DNA, where we were thinking about, you know, what is going to be our accessible technology strategy, and building and creating and drafting a business case around that. You know, early on, getting some sort of validation from the United States National Federation of the Blind when it comes to a web accessibility certification. And as we're going, you know, as we continue to go through into 2016, the company, and specifically out of human resources, global diversity and inclusion, creating the Disability and Inclusion Strategy Council, where you know, the council surfaces and elevates you know, everything that's related to disability and inclusion, including digital accessibility. And so I mentioned a foundation and an environment where in 2019, a new organization within Merck and MSD was the Enterprise Digital Governance. Essentially, this is a cross-organizational framework that enhances the connection between all the various global support functions and the business. So what does that mean? That means that being able to ensure that cybersecurity is understood by the business, being able to ensure that privacy is understood by the business. Also, when it comes to corporate branding and style, and common tone, common voice, making sure that that is connected to the business. And pharmacovigilance, drug safety, making sure that that is connected. So it's a framework really to, you know, ensure our compliance with regulations, but also to optimize our digital assets. And so it's with that framework that digital accessibility was included. And given the capacity and the nature of the enterprise digital framework, was able to pull together all the different activity that was happening around accessibility. Up until that point, make no mistake, there were pockets of practice of digital accessibility around the company, a global company. A group in Prague, IT, was also, you know, developing, you know, their practices around accessibility, and other divisions within the company, and animal health groups, you know, practicing accessibility. In the Austin IT hub, same thing with our platforms, practicing accessibility. But what was really needed was this framework to kind of stitch it all together, make the connections, because as you know, in a very large company, there's the tendency to work in silos, and everyone is, you know, heads down doing their own thing. But you know, it's that enterprise digital governance that kind of made that connection from all the different practices of digital accessibility, bringing it into one community of practice, as it were. And with input from these different groups, being able to create a working team to say, okay, let's put together a corporate policy that really is an umbrella for all the activity that we're doing. And so we did that. We did our due diligence. We figured out where should the policy sit. And to your point, Francis, about you know, it shouldn't just be HR. Today, our policy does sit within HR. However, to your point as well, that it is co-owned. The sponsorship for this digital accessibility initiative is co-owned between HR, Global Diversity Inclusion, our marketing and commercial business, as well as our information technology. And so we've got co-ownership, co-sponsorship. And that's one of the things that we learned in our due diligence as we were building out the policy. We looked externally to understand what was happening with other similarly large companies. And we found that it doesn't sit just in IT, it doesn't just sit in research and development. It doesn't just sit in customer relations or product development. It's really across the entire company. And so that is what we did. We built out that policy with a cross-organizational working team, working in Agile, subject matter experts already practicing digital accessibility. And then as we move forward, we would pressure test the policy, standard and procedures with a larger stakeholder group of leaders across the organization. And once we had their collective input and buy-in, then it was a matter of, okay, let's roll this out. And of course, this is a huge initiative. And so, it's a phased rollout. It is a journey. It's not a one and done sort of thing. And it started with, okay, let's figure out what our training plans are going to be for a global workforce. What is our communication plan going to be to educate and roll this out for a global workforce? And so within enterprise digital governance, we have the monthly roundtables that are with a global audience. And since October, we actually started featuring segments on accessibility, introducing it, talking through what the policy is, and then on another roundtable, talking through what the standards were, and then the procedures and the how-to. And really, a phrase I like to use with change management is it's the steady drip of change management, that you just keep inserting it, and you start to get, that's where the tide begins to rise, as it were. And so we're at the point now where we have some markets that are already rolling out accessibility for the websites, and also, and for some markets it's relatively new. We do have training that is for the entire company workforce, and by that I mean employees and contractors, awareness training. Part of our training plan includes having role-based training, so based off of your role, if you're a designer, a developer, or a content author, or a business owner of a digital asset, certain specific training for you. And really it's not just websites or chatbots or mobile applications. It's really educating the workforce, the global workforce, on how to use Office 365, being able to turn on the accessibility checker and use it. So it's the software that we're using. It's how to create PDFs so that they can be scanned by an assistive technology tool. Internal sites as well as external. Really, pretty much everything that we do is in some way tied to some sort of digital asset. And at the end of the day, it's really making that accessible. And of course, with last year, with the pandemic, and this year, the virtual events, such as we're using right now, being able to understand and utilize technology that provides captioning and so forth. So it's really everything that we do, and it is definitely a journey. And so very exciting one, but it's been overwhelming actually to see the response from throughout the company, throughout the different markets, but also the affirmation from our executive leaders of this is of course the right thing to do, and getting behind it. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Steve. You clearly demonstrated that implementing a structured accessibility governance strategy is clearly a journey. So I may have one question for you. And by the way, talking about questions, a reminder to the audience, please feel free to post all your questions for our brilliant speakers of today in the Q&A section of the Zoom here. We'll make sure that all of them are being addressed as part of this session. And if we don't have time to answer each and every questions, we'll make sure to have some follow-up with the guest and myself if needed. So my question to you, Steve, is really, you mentioned, as I said, this journey. What has been some of the greatest challenges for digital accessibility at MSD?
Well, that's a great question. I'm sort of the glass is half full sort of guy, so I would see them as opportunities, and because we had lots of opportunities. I would say that there is no roadmap for this for any large organization. There's no one size fits all. And so it's really kind of discovering how is this going to fit successfully into the operations, the culture of a company. And so I think it starts with that, as generally understanding what is the annual flow of a company. When is profit planning and budgeting occur? How does this relate to rolling out the policy that you're trying to do? Because that's going to impact everyone's profit planning. How does this compare to all the other training that everyone gets assigned? When is the right time to insert that training? And other things that are happening around the company organizationally. Large companies often have reorganizations, and that can always be another opportunity, as it were. So I think it's not having a playbook to do this, but being able to have enough understanding about what your company does and how that would work. It's really a strategic campaign. And if we could show the slide one more time, if we could get that back up, I would like to just point out one thing that I forgot to mention about campaign. And is there a way to get the slide back up? There we go. So yes, so campaign, and if you notice the illustration that we have here, this was what we had created specifically for digital accessibility at Merck and MSD. And this is really, and I mentioned campaign because this is where you want some sort of brand recognition of this initiative. And so this is probably one of the first times that we've been showing this, and of course we're showing this around internally at Merck and MSD. But really, it's when you have some sort of unique identifier, a visual, that when over time, the person looking at it says, yes, I know what this means. This is digital accessibility. And so I think it's important to view rolling out a digital accessibility policy, training, awareness, all of that was some sort of campaign branding, as it were. And that's what we're attempting to do here. And you can check back with me in a year or so to see if it actually worked. But this is what we found in our company, Merck and MSD, is that other such initiatives had this sort of branding element to it, where when an individual saw a visual, they knew exactly what it meant. And so that's what we're trying to do here, because it's really getting into the way we work, the way we think, the way we build our digital assets. And so that's kind of the approach that we're taking here as well. So again, there's no playbook, and it's really it's quite thrilling and exciting to see how we navigate through this going forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Steve. So while you were talking, I was looking at the Q&A session, the Q&A chat window, and obviously Both Francis and your speeches triggers some questions. So let me start with a question to both of you, Francis and Steve. Which arguments work best to get IT colleagues and other relevant colleagues committed to digital accessibility? Maybe you, Francis?
Hi. Yeah, so I think with the IT department is be able to elevate accessibility as a technology imperative, right? We all know that the CIOs and CTOs are paying tremendous attention to topics such as privacy, securities. And the reason they're doing that because these two topics actually affect each individual, customers and employee or partners. And this is actually a recent phenomenon when the technology become personalized, like in the form factor of a cell phone. Everybody have access to technology. So the argument or the opportunity, using Steve's words, is to present accessibility as a way to improve your customer and employee experience, and then making sure that there are no barrier, just like privacy and security. So to raise accessibility to be on par of other technology focus area, such as in privacy and security, is one way to get their attention. And also, frankly, to speak to the future direction of how, for example, AI, artificial intelligence, is affecting individual. If you're talking about unconscious bias or conscious bias that build into AI, every CIO and CTO are tuned to have that kind of argument. So that's when you can bring in to say, you know what, in my vocabulary, I talk about human first, right? This is really not about accessibility. This is about putting human in the center of any of your technology initiative.
Thank you, Francis. What about you, Steve?
Yeah.
Do you concur with?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
absolutely.
Go
So
ahead.
I was, I've thought about this, and the comparison that I make, and I totally agree with Francis. This is, in terms of when you design for accessibility, you just make a better product. And I think that's, the very famous curb cut effect analogy, where if you design something for folks with disabilities, everyone benefits. But I also think about the comparison with the a few years back when responsive design was a relatively new thing. And so myself working in digital marketing agencies where you would try to get the client to, buy into the idea of, let's make this website responsive so that it can be used on all devices. And of course, it was at the time something additional. Well, today it's a given. Everything that's created has some sort of responsive nature because of the fact that we're using so many different devices. I think if you're going to have a successful externally facing website, it has to be responsive, and that's just part of the DNA of a website. And so similarly, I see this as expertise evolves as our user experience designers are embedding this into their designs. I think, I could see this envision, down the road where accessibility goes the way that responsive design is, where it is almost an assumption, it's a given, it's well understood, there's a body of knowledge that supports it, and I'm hopeful that is the direction. And it's just a body of knowledge that's really, the more folks know about it, then and in the technology space, that's what you're going to see. Well, I mentioned the pockets of practice at Merck and MSD, and interestingly, it's coming from our UX designers who are designing our websites and our software. And so in a way, that next generation of IT subject matter experts are leading the way. And you know, I use the analogy of that my father-in-law gave at my wedding, is that the neck always turns the head.
So true, so true. So let's stay with you. I would like to end with this kind of very wise sentence. I get another question for you, Steve. Did you experience pushback or resistance to this whole strategy rollout? How are you overcoming it to build buy-in among internal and external stakeholders?
The 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 challenges and the opportunities, again, the pushback was because there's so much happening, you know, at the company currently, um, organizationally, and you know, it was never a question of should we do this, because it was clear and evident that this is, you know, the right thing to do. It was never about that. It was about how and when. And so that is, and you know, there's never a perfect time, so you can go with that assumption. And it's really how to mobilize a global workforce with this initiative. And so um, it's that awareness, it's that steady drip of change management, it's that education, it's having forums and roundtables to introduce the idea and build on, you know, one little nugget of knowledge they learn one month and then build on it the next month. In your introduction of me, you know, you mentioned that I've, you know, been a professor for over 25 years, and so in doing this, I kind of took that I couldn't help but take an approach naturally to me where, you know, okay, how am I rolling out a curriculum? You can't just give everything at once and expect a student to understand it. You have to roll it out. That's it's called a syllabus. It's a course. It's the same thing. And so whether I meant to or not, that is kind of how things happened with educating. And because certainly if you throw everything at, you know, about digital accessibility, it's so massive. You can't expect someone to go take WCAG and, you know, and have a good reading of it. So you have to parse it out measurably in digestible chunks, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well,
Can
the
I
next
just
question,
add?
let's go back. I'm sorry, Francis, go ahead, please.
I was just going to add a comment to what Steve just said. I totally agree with him that you really have to, you know, put it in a chunk size, and that's relevant to the point in time, because we are at a very big digital accessibility is actually emerging, is a new, relatively new topic. So for those of us who are passionate about it, feel like, you know, years has gone by, but for a lot of our business executives, you know, the entire concept is still new. So one always have to keep that in mind. And then, like Steve mentioned, I think it's because Steve is a musician first and foremost, so he's in tune to where the business needs are. And I think one of the biggest, I would say, suggestion I would have to make the buy-in of a digital accessibility more organic and more sustainable is to be very in tune where your business direction is. And if you remember back in IBM, and we will do the fall plan every year, right, to plan for the next year. And in the spring, we'll do strategy. And every year, I have to readjust the plan to map to the business, right? So I think that is one thing, one takeaway, especially for large global organizations. You don't go in with one song and keep playing it and say you need to do accessibility for XYZ reason. It has to be contextualized.
Absolutely, that's clear. You also mentioned, Francis, that COVID-19 created inclusive digital transformation opportunities. And can you elaborate on a little bit about that, please.
Great question. Yeah, I think COVID-19 overnight, if you remember in March when we were all told to stay home and yet everybody has to work. So Zoom, for those people who bought Zoom stock, they really, really benefited from the incredible consumption of Zoom type of technology. I think that really put the technology in front and center its relationship with the human and also in this case, work. Right. So this future work scenario actually was brought forward probably at least a decade sooner because of the COVID. And every CEO is just thinking about how do they do digitization of their organization so they can, render this kind of remote working through technology possibility and capabilities. So that's why I think if you Google it, all the major, whether it is business school or these management consulting company, all analyzing the speed and the velocity of digital transformation. And so because of that, I think there's a huge opportunity for us to embed digital accessibility. And like I mentioned, because again, the executive are very in tune to the social justice movement of inclusion. So this is a perfect timing for us to actually merge these two major initiatives, digitalization and social justice, in one kind of one point of view to bring it forward. So that's why I say that COVID actually offered us a great opportunity to broaden, frankly, the discussion of accessibility from compliance to a business imperative.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. That makes absolute total sense here. Now, a question for both of you. How do you deal with accessibility remediation for commercial products that don't meet WCAG and other accessibility standards? Many of the popular ERPs we are using.
So the question is, how do we deal with some of the commercial product that's not
that do
accessible?
not meet the standards? Yeah, that do not meet the accessibility standards like WCAG.
I would say that this actually go back to Steve's comment. I'm sure Steve can elaborate more. I think this actually comes back down to the company's policy, especially on the procurement side, right? I mean, I know that when we were at IBM, we actually worked very closely with the procurement to make sure that we actually test, the application. Now, granted, not every company is up to the quote unquote the perfect standard. In many cases, we will have to work with the vendors, but because we're a large company, we do have the knowledge and resources, and we will team up with the vendor if the vendor's other functions are so compelling. But that we always do that kind of assessment up front so we know the gap is. So again, I think the expectation, as this is a emerging topic, I don't think it's realistic to assume all the vendors are going to have 100% compliant. So then that's when the company have to make a conscious decision. What is your position in this? Are you going to just reject them, or are you going to partner with them, or you build them, right? I mean, in some cases, we actually chose to build our very own because we do have the resources. And if we think it's a mission critical, such as, for example, our workplace accommodation portal, we just decided we just have to build it in-house to make sure it's absolutely compliant from day one. Not just compliant, but usable.
Steve, do you have anything to add to this?
Sure, absolutely. There's a few things there I can follow up from what you mentioned, Francis. So around procurement and supplier management, that's another area that I forgot to mention earlier, was that, yes, working with our supplier management to take a look at the supplier assessments for for any third-party vendor, you know, and ensuring that, you know, those assessments start to incorporate, you know, accessibility requirements, which would then subsequently inform, you know, the contract language. But to the, you know, the larger picture, you know, the workforce, the training that we have here is for the workforce. And notice how I'm not saying employees, I'm saying workforce. So that does mean employees and contractors as well. And, you know, third-party contractors. So, you know, so that whole supplier management procurement piece really is meant to, you know, ingrain accessibility into those RFP language and the contract language and templates and so forth. You had mentioned also, you know, the remediation. There's a question around how do you do that. And so going back to the idea that this is a journey, you know, I think there's a couple of steps there where, you know, when you have over 3,000 websites out there globally, you know, you can't fix them all at once. And so it's really being able to, on a case-by-case basis, be able to do an assessment as to where are the biggest areas of opportunity. And, you know, a website will, what are the pages that are getting the most traffic? And so let's make those accessible first, and work that into the backlog of any digital assets, you know, enhancement roadmap. And so I think that's, again, it's a journey. Cover the, you know, the things that are mission critical first, and, you know, continue to build on, you know, making things accessible. And of course, every time you have a content change, then it needs to be checked for accessibility. So the remediation, again, is a journey. But additionally, I think also there are some quick wins that one can do around, you know, any sort of externally facing website, where similar to in the footer, when you have the privacy statement and, you know, the terms of use statement, and, you know, the trustee panels and so forth, the cookie panel. Similarly, you can have an accessibility statement that really, you know, indicates to the external world that yes, we have a policy. This is what we're doing about it, and we're on this journey. And so, I think there's several steps. There's some quick wins for remediation, and at the heart of it, it's really you know, getting out in front and working with our third-party vendors. And you know, the truth is, you know, if you're a third-party vendor and you're providing a, you know, a digital service, I would imagine that this would be, you know, on your priority list as well, as to become competitive, because this is a rising tide. And if a technology vendor wants to stay in business, they're going to have to adopt this too. So.
Well, that's absolutely true. One last question before we wrap up, and this question is directed to you, Steve. How are your leaders helping you socialize an accessibility mindset among the general workforce, so that people who aren't communication, marketing, and technology or product developers build into their daily behavior? How they create decks and day-to-day work documents.
Mm-hmm. So to answer the first part of your question on how are the leaders, so I can say that tomorrow, being Global Accessibility Awareness Day, May 20, we are doing our own internal webcast, and we do have our Chief Information Officer joining us in a roundtable. And so from our executive committee, it's wonderful to have that that support, that communication to the entire company. Also on that panel is our VP of Global Disability and Inclusion, and our VP of Digital Strategy and Commercial Excellence as well. And so we've got our leaders joining us in messaging this out to the entire company. When it comes to your later part of your question around, what does this mean for everybody in the company? Well, I make it as simple as this. If you use email, this policy applies to you. So being able to use Office 365, your Outlook, with the digital accessibility features, so that not just the person you're sending it to may or may not have a need, but you know how emails get passed around. And so this is where it's incumbent on all of us to, in the documents, the PowerPoints, the Word documents, the emails, that they have accessibility, the accessibility features activated. And to that point, part of the training, part of the job aids that we have is to really leverage what our Microsoft partner has in place for the various platforms within Office 365. And so really leveraging that. And, it's, and we're discovering that now currently. Are there things that we can turn on or turn off for Office 365? We're having those conversations now. And so it really impacts everybody. And so again, this is a journey. And as our CIO mentioned, let's start with awareness. Let's make people aware. And it's that, again, that steady drip of change management.
Thank you very much, Steve. I think, unfortunately, it's time to close this very, very interesting conversation. So I cannot thank you enough, both of you, for your expertise, your passion, and sharing your experience. And I'm sorry for the other questions that were not addressed as part of this conversation. I would really encourage all of you in the audience to have a look at the primer that you can download from the Business and Disability Org publication website here. This is really a very, very fundamental document that everybody, whether you're a technical person or completely allergic to any technical notion like myself, you will thoroughly enjoy reading. And I also want to thank Steve for his sharing his experience. And it's clear, as he said, that developing and implementing an accessibility, a successful accessibility strategy that becomes a reality in the day-to-day business of the organization is really a journey that requires patience, and, as Francis said, a lot of work, and repeating the same message and again, and eventually it will become the norm for all of us. I would, I always like to end this kind of conversation with a very, I think, impactful example. You may recall that when the IT companies like IBM, for instance, and others started developing software, security was kind of a nice to have. But nowadays, absolutely nobody would think about developing an application, solution, software, whatever, without including the essential security requirements. And I hope that going forward, accessibility will take the same path, from a nice to have to something that is essential as part of an organization IT strategy. So thank you again for all of you for participating in this meeting, and thank you again to our speakers and our host, the ILO Global Business and Disability Network. Thank you very much, and have a nice rest of your day.